All right, so I wanted to speak about integration. And one of the key things with integration is firstly coming to terms with what our actual intention was. In order to have an effective integration, we need to know, well, what was the actual spearhead of my prayer, of my intention that I set at the outline. Oftentimes, I find that people aren't even clear on what their intention was, or they had a blasé, a rough intention, a rough idea, but they didn't give themselves the time to clarify. Now, the thing is, sometimes with an intention, if we're new to living with intentionality and creating our life consciously, then our intentions can, in a way, be misguided or misleading because we set them from the frame of our ego. But true intention doesn't operate at the level of ego. True intention lives in our heart. It lives in sincere expression. It lives in transparency. And so sometimes it can take a minute to get to know who we are and actually what the current of our intention is. Because intention, it can be seen as this thing that we think of in our heads, but truthfully, my experience confirms that absolutely our intention is that which we live, and it's the current of our heart. And it's only about bringing our awareness to the rhythm of our own heart so that we can understand exactly what it is that our soul is looking for, so that we can live in finer alignment with that. So that's the first thing. The second piece that's really important is that the actual process of integration is a holistic game. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that you can't just look at one area of life. You can't just look at finances. You can't just look at health. In order to have effective integration, you need to look at what is it that truly inspires me in every single domain of life. Finances and career, spirituality, mentally, emotionally, physically, relationships, romantic and friendships. You got to look at the whole game and give yourself the time to actually sit down and write out a master plan. This is what I did for myself. Before I started my big journey to Mexico, I sat down and I got really, really clear over the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, what are the things that I'd love to encounter that would truly inspire me? And I set that as the intention. Now that came from a sense of deep inspiration within me. And I had the very clear awareness that it can take some time for some of these things to manifest, but it's important that I get clear on exactly what it was. For example, one of my prayers, one of my intentions was to create a product that connects people to the earth, that gives them the capacity to experience the potency of natural plant medicines, plant remedies. And this ended up giving birth to the Chilcagüe that some of you may have seen the video that I have on my YouTube channel from the Fuck Up Nights discussion, where I shared my story of how that came to be, playing my flute on the streets. But this was one of my intentions. I've always been inspired by the healing capacity within plants, and I wanted to create a brand, to create a product that can inspire people to come into contact with the true power of plants. If you've ever tried this plant, there's no denying that it works because you feel the effects instantly. And that's what I love about it. It's something that gives people a very clear, sharp connection to it. This was one of my intentions. In order for this to manifest, it took about two years of my path in Mexico and my spiritual searches and pilgrimages and ceremonies and all these things that took place in order for this to actually manifest. That's just one example. Then you've got relationships, then you've got finances, then you've got the deeper aspects of yourself, your soul, your artistry, your gifts to humanity, the book that I'm writing. These are all things that take a little bit of time. So it's important, in order to integrate effectively, that we don't just look at the one ceremony, but we actually look at the totality of our lives. And if we're taking up the commitment to sit through a ceremony or sit through some kind of transformational practice or go and pilgrimage and meet sacred sites and do these things, that we're really clear on why we're doing it. That we don't get caught up in the hocus pocus and the fairy dust of the spiritual world and the beautiful things that can be seen and the shiny stars and the rainbows, but that we actually have a very clear idea of, no, this is the magic that I want to live in my life, and this is what I'm willing to stand for, and this is what I'm willing to give up my time, effort, energy, finances for in order to create a life that I'm truly inspired by. When you set that as your chief aim, as the tip of the spearhead or the tip of the arrow, then life begins to manifest in beautiful ways. So that's number one. Then the next thing is, as we decide on that arrowhead and what it looks like, and we start moving in that direction, it's natural that there's going to be a shift of identity, a sense of, I don't know what's happening to my world. I feel like my world is falling apart. I feel like my world is fragile. These are all natural parts of the process, because essentially there's a dying off that happens of illusions and ideas that we had about life, so that something new can be born. Now, in that in-between stage, we can feel alone, and we can have a sense of, I don't know what's real anymore, because reality is shifting for us. It's changing. We're forming a new reality, one that we're inspired by to a new degree, or one that we're inspired by to begin with. Some people live lives that are uninspiring for a long time. Wherever you find yourself in that spectrum is fine, but it's important to understand that there is this sense of things feeling like an illusion, that there is this sense of things washing away, that there is this sense of feeling like things aren't as solid as what they once were, because they're not, because they are changing. It can almost feel dreamlike, that state. And in that dreamlike state, what's important to come to terms with is these beautiful words that I absolutely love that say, our greatest life is when we are in dreams awake. What I love about that is the fact that it speaks to the dreamer within us that can cast a beautiful vision and can allow it to manifest, and at the same time not get caught up in the seriousness and the solidarity of life and feeling like we're always trapped up in caged walls and fortresses, but understanding that this world is malleable, that we can create as we speak, that we can manifest an inspired vision for ourselves, and that there is a malleable texture to this life, to this universe, that we can totally work with, and that's working with the energies of life. Now, when we're in that state, like I mentioned, we can feel kind of alone. It can be a little bit scary, especially if we're around a circle of people that don't really understand it, that haven't embraced change. Because here's the truth, change is the only constant that we have in this life, yet so many people living day to day forget about that, and they get stuck in the mundane, they get stuck in the routine. I have my husband, I have my wife, I have my house, I have my career, I have my children, whatever it may be, and they get stuck into this routine of thinking that's the way it's always going to be, but it's not. The only thing that's for certain is no single person is going to make it out of this alive, and that things are going to change along the thread of life. So for the time that we're here, it's important to understand that we are going to change. Secondly, it's important to embrace change when it finds us. And thirdly, it's important to come to terms with the fact that we're not going to make it out of here alive. And so we might as well have a good time along the way. Life is a game. It's a thrill. It's a joy, if we choose it to be. Change can be challenging. It can bring discomfort. It can bring heartache. It can bring headaches. It can bring turbulence. It doesn't have to be serious. We have to be intentional. We have to be disciplined. We have to be concentrated. We have to be focused so that we can create what's needed. We have to carry the responsibility of our life in a way that is honoring of the life we want to craft for ourselves, but at the same time, along the way, seriousness of responsibility doesn't mean total seriousness and that we can't have fun. We can absolutely have a ball with this life. And so it's important to remember that, because oftentimes I find that people get very caught up in the seriousness of the responsibility of dealing with our lives, and then they forget about the joy and the beauty and the sweetness of life. So it's important to have both of those aspects keeping us balanced out. And the reality is that one of my good teachers beautifully said it once, that truth expresses itself at the opposing edge of two paradigms. So being able to entertain the paradigm of seriousness and focus and concentration and discipline, yet at the same time entertaining the childlike play and joy and humor that we have, and holding those two at the same time and giving life to both of them, but not betting to either one of those two sides definitely, allows truth to permeate and something beautiful to bloom from the center of those two paradigms. So that's really important on integration, having a complete idea of the transformation we want to bring into our lives, understanding that we can play with intention and we can play with life, and that we can make it a joyful process and it doesn't have to be serious. And then understanding around integration that the community that you have around you is really important. If people aren't accustomed to deep transformational change, whether that's through ceremony, pilgrimage, sacred site visiting, or some other modality, it doesn't matter. But it's important to understand and appreciate that typically what I found is it's unwise to share your experiences with people who aren't as far down the path as you. So people who are younger on the path, let's say. And the reason why is because they can oftentimes give opinion that can cloud your own experience. Wisest, what I found, is to share your experience with a handful of people that you confide in, that you sense have the capacity to hear your experience, to offer insight that can guide your journey, but not to pose any impression of their personal bias on your experience. The reason that's important is because true masters, as far as I've experienced in my life, they'll typically just show the way, and it's for us to walk, and it's for us to engage. And they're not going to take care of the work for us, and they're not going to do the work for us, but they will show the way, and they'll probably share a few good insights and a few good jokes for us so that we can find humor and joy in the process as we go through creating the most inspired life that we could possibly have. That's really important to understand. The other piece that I really appreciate is honoring the silence. That when we go through a transformational experience, there can be a lot of energy, absolutely, but we don't have to spill that energy by speaking about it. We can allow ourselves to be centered, to be present, and to allow that energy to pack in and to settle in. This is one of the greatest treasures. That's your luck. That's your inspiration. That's all the beauty that you received. Speaking about that isn't going to manifest the life that you love. Working with that energy in a new creative way so that something new can manifest, that's where the magic happens. And so I like to use the metaphor of planting a seed. If you take a tomato seed, for example, and you take a look at that tomato seed, you will see something. And you might say, I want to know what's inside that seed. And you'll crack it open and you'll take a look, and you'll just find a little black seed inside of a yellow husk, and that's it. But if you were to understand and appreciate that that seed is the potential for something, and that when you bust that seed open, you've busted the potential for something to be born, then when you put that busted seed in the earth, nothing's going to come of it. Yet if you allow yourself to entertain the mystery of life, because life is a mystery, and you say, well, here's this potential of life, let me plant it in the earth, cover it in complete darkness, and let me leave it there, give it a bit of sunshine, a little bit of water, and let me see what comes of it. With some time, you'll eventually have a beautiful green plant, and with some more due care, a bit of fertilizer, a bit of love, and a bit of time, you'll eventually have some fruits. And with a bit of time, those fruits will ripen and you'll have a beautiful tomato to eat. In the same way, a transformational process that we go through is like that seed. We've planted a seed during this transformational process, a seed of consciousness, so that something new can be born in our lives. And if we go speaking about it too much, we're essentially busting open that seed of consciousness. Wiser is to say, you know what? I've been through my experience. I have my 1 or 2, 3 people that I can confide in if I need support along the way. But let me allow this energy to sit with me. Let me allow it to settle so that something new can be born, being the tomato plant. And eventually so that that tomato plant can birth some fruit, being the tomato itself. In this way, what we experience during the night of a ceremony or a pilgrimage or a transformational experience isn't anywhere near as important as what's going to be birthed of it as a result. A personal example of mine is that I went through many ceremonies where I had inspiration for certain things, but what it ended up birthing from me not speaking during a 9-month period of silence where I didn't share a single word with anyone about my processes, about my experiences or any of that, I allowed all those 9 months for the energy to pack in, and eventually what birthed was a book, the inspiration for a book, and to share some of my adventures and some of the things I encountered along the way. I didn't see that book during my ceremonies, during my pilgrimages throughout Mexico, during my adventures throughout Mexico. What I saw was something completely different. And had I spoken about what I'd seen, I would have probably never had the clarity to pursue that book and to write it in the way that I have. So in that way, I wanted to share some of these threads of awareness for you so that you can understand that integration is a process. It does take time. Not to be in a hurry to have a finite solution right now, because we don't live in a finite world. We live in an infinite world, and there is many possibilities for how it can play out. And it's up to us as the custodian of our own lives and the steward of our own lives to care for ourselves appropriately. That starts by caring for our heart first, putting ourselves first and appreciating that the very process of engaging with transformation, many people are afraid of. Most people don't want to change. It's the last thing that they want. So kudos to you. Give yourself credit for the fact that you've engaged with that. Second to that, give yourself time and space for things to come to place the way that they need to be. The most beautiful life that we can give ourselves is one that we're probably not aware of at the realm of something we can conjure up from our minds. It's something that's birthed through us following inspiration. And so I encourage you to keep following inspiration, that if your world feels malleable, it's because it is, and it's completely fine. That if your world feels like a figment of your imagination, it's because it is, and it's completely fine, and you can change that at any point. The important thing is to remember what it is that has us feel a sense of groundedness, of earthiness, feeling rooted in our experience of life, so that we can stand on 2 feet, feeling safe, secure, sure about our direction, being decided about what we're creating. And what I found to be really valuable is that when I was younger, I used to pin my support on people and on things that would change. And that was cool and it was valuable for a period of time. But what I found after a little while was that, well, everyone's going to change and everyone's going to die. And maybe these people don't die, but maybe my relationship with them changes. So they're no longer that pillar of support that they once were. And that can be challenging. Now, that's fine. And we'll go through those challenges when we need to. But what I found more valuable was, well, how can I pin my support pillars on something that I know is for sure is always going to be there? And for me, that was birthed through my first book, if you've read The Embrace of the Elements. It came from understanding my body really well, through taking care of it, physical training, nutrition, health, making sure that this vessel, this vehicle for experiencing life is in really good stead, that it's really well taken care of. That was number one. What that allowed me to do was to connect to the elements. That's the air, that's the fire, that's the earth, that's the water, and that's the space in between. Those 5 elements. And what I found was when I started to bet on them as my pillars of support, then I knew that they'd always be there. I knew I always had something to fall back on that was absolutely secure and certain. And there's no better place to build ourselves up from than the very earth that we stand and walk on and live from. So that was a really valuable process that I went through that I oftentimes encourage people to entertain, because when you create your life rooted in the earth itself and the feet that you walk on in direct connection with this beautiful marble that we call our mother, our cosmic Mother Earth, then that's where magic starts to happen. That's where she's always right there for you. That's where you don't need a phone call or a response to a text message or something like that. You can place your hands on her and she's right there to support you. And that's what I love. That's the deep inspiration that I feel in my heart, and that's what I share with people, to create their lives in such a way that they can always feel that support, that clarity. And then the people that show up in our lives, that's a bonus. The support that shows up through humans, through animals, through the stars or whatever else it may be, through various messages, that's all a bonus. But the most valuable thing is having a solid pillar of support that you can always bet on. So there's a few pieces on integration for you from here. The last thing that I wanted to speak to was just to dial in a little bit more on the necessity that people feel to speak about their experiences, to the point where they compare their experiences with other people. It's important to understand that just as our thumbprints are individual to each one of us, so too are our experiences with transformation. No 2 people will have the same transformational experience ever, and no 2 people will have the same transformational experience in and of themselves from one experience to the next, meaning one ceremony to the next, one pilgrimage to the next. Life is in constant motion. We are in constant change. No 2 moments are the same. So it's naive to believe that 2 people would have the same experience, or that you'd have the same experience on 2 separate occasions. The reason I caution people with sharing this stuff is because, one, it can create confusion. The truth is, you want to allow time and space for clarity to set in around your experiences. That's really important. And second to that is that the search for rationalizing and normalizing something like this is unfair to ourselves, because we're doing work that's not just of our life. We're doing work for those that have come before us and those that are yet to come, for our ancestors and our elders and those future generations. And it's important to understand that one person's lineage is completely different to the next. And so we're going to go through a very unique experience in and of ourselves that the next person may not go through. There may be some threads of similarity, but to compare cards or to compare notes and to say like, hey, well, I experienced this and you didn't, does that make my experience normal or abnormal or something like this? That's just placing judgment on an experience which isn't fair. It's not fair, because we want to keep that slate clean so that we can appreciate exactly what was for what it was, and that's it, without a need to define it, and to just be present to it, to witness the experience, and to allow ourselves to understand the clarity of the picture after the work is said and done. Because when that clarity sets in, that's what we really want to be working with. And when we work with that, that's where the magic happens. Oftentimes, the key pieces of integration, just like the experiences themselves, are outside of our comfort zone, but that's where the magic happens. So to the degree that you can allow yourself to surrender, to the degree that you can allow yourself to embrace whatever life wants to deliver to you, and to the degree that you can be diligent in taking care of what I call the homework that we're given after a process, that's the most important piece. Oftentimes people will receive information, insights, and know that they have to take care of something, but they'll put it to the wayside because I have to work, because I have kids, and they'll find a reason not to do it. And the truth is, we have time and space to do all these things. We have 24 hours in a day, just like anyone else. And there's plenty of examples of parents or business people or people who are occupied that give themselves time and space for everything. So you can do the same. It's just about how you organize your time and space. And it's important to prioritize that homework so it can be done. The reason why is because that sets things in motion for the life to manifest that you truly love, that you're truly inspired by. That's it for this one. I'll see you on the next one.